This is Chapter 18. Peter dropped from the beam when he caught sight of Vola limping through the rain toward the barn, and tried not to look guilty. Vola was suspicious he'd been doing more than the exercises she'd order. He was, doubling them usually, and she wasn't happy about it. It takes a healthy adult 4 weeks to do what you're trying to do in one. You're bound to hurt yourself, she'd warned him several times. In just these few days, it had become an old argument. He watched her shake off water in the doorway and reminded him of Pax, the dog-like way she did that. Was it raining where he was? Would he still shake himself off if there was no warm, dry inside to come to? Peter shivered and rubbed his arms. What's the matter? You look like you're in pain. Your arms hurt? No. I mean, of course they did, but it was a good hurt. A soreness that meant he was getting closer to being strong enough to go. He dropped and did 3 push-ups, his cast resting on his left ankle. See, I'm fine. Can I do the obstacle course now? It's not raining as hard. No, you can't get that cast wet. I'll figure out some way to waterproof it before you leave, but for today, stay in here. Do all your drills already? Beam work, sack dragging, cinder blocks, all that core work you taught me. Vola nodded to the wall of marionettes. Why don't you practice then? Because those puppets don't get me a minute closer to my fox, Peter wanted to say. He sighed deeply and rolled his eyes instead. Vola was unmoved. How are you coming with them? Oh, okay, I'm good, He practiced a few times and got a little better. The strings didn't tangle up anyway. Sometimes, though, the controls still worked exactly the opposite of the way he expected them to, and the puppets always looked twitchy, as if they were being electrocuted. But he had run out of patience. Let's do the show. I'm going to be leaving soon, Vola. Peter lifted the crutches, which moved as if they were extensions of his arms now. I made it to the ridge and back twice yesterday. I was on these things almost 6 hours. I would have done 8, except you took them away, remember? I'm ready to go. Vola dropped a handful of nails into an overlap pocket and slid a hammer into her belt loop. Then she leveled him in gaze. Show me how you work Sinbad. Peter gave another sigh, which Vola ignored again and picked Sinbad off the wall. He swept the puppet over a bale of hay and dropped it into a wooden egg in the big tin bowl that Vola had painted to look like a nest. He knew how clumsy it looked. He sent her a hopeful gaze. Really? That's the desperate hero risking his life for a chance to escape the mighty Roke? Vola took the controls from him, and instantly the marionette seemed to become flesh and blood. Think about what he wants, to escape, she said, as if Peter had asked for a lesson. Drop his arms and lead with them like this, see? Kind of low and sneaky. Have him sink down into the nest till he's hiding behind the egg. Once he's there, you can let him go and fly the rope over the nest from the other side. From the night, remember? So it doesn't tangle Sinbad's strings. Bring it down directly onto the egg, nice and slow, so the magnets in its talons catch hold of one of Sinbad's hands. They don't move like that for me. Why don't you just set up a mirror and watch yourself act it out? Vola glared at him. It's the 3rd condition, and it's not optional. Come over here. She carried the puppets to her workbench. He wants to move. All the puppets want to move because I made them that way. You just have to show them how. Your muscles to theirs. Your muscles to theirs. She took off Sinbad's cloak. Then, to Peter's shock, she unstrung his wires. She reached for a screwdriver and disassembled the puppet until he was nothing more than a pile of scattered parts. Then she held the screwdriver out. Peter clamped the crutches under his armpits and raised his palms. You watched, didn't you? Yeah, but I just stopped in for some tools. I'll be back in an hour. You have this puppet put back together then, and you won't have any more problems after that. She slapped the screwdriver in his hand and left without another word. It actually wasn't that hard. The marionette's knees and elbows were simple one-way hinges. The shoulders and hips carved wooden ball joints, and Peter could see allowed for greater movement. The hands and feet were fastened with leather straps. The stringing was trickier, but once he figured out that the hands had to work off with a control that moved like a dragonfly, he was able to figure out the others. And Vola was right. After he refastened Sinbad, he could move the puppet more smoothly. Your muscles to theirs, Vola had said, and sure enough, Peter was able to translate the movements she suggested from his own body to Sinbad's. Your muscles to theirs didn't work for the rogue. Peter flexed his shoulders, swooped his arms, but the bird only lurched a few strokes and then fell as if it had been shot. The bird's glittering gaze seemed to a reproach. I'm sorry, bird. I don't know how you're supposed to be doing, though. Aren't you trying to eat the guy? Are you protecting your egg? Suddenly, Peter wanted to know the rogue's story, wanted to get it right. He found the slot where Vola kept the Sinbad book. He drew it out, and he heard a quiet thunk. There was something at the back of the niche. He pulled it out. A square tin, faded yellow and decorated with peeling words, Sunshine Biscuits. He studied it on his palm and thought back to the battered cookie tin he'd found at his grandfather's, the one with the heap of soldiers guarding the surprising photo. He pried off the lid. Inside was a stack of index cards, scrawled with handwriting he'd already come to recognize. He knew instantly that he held Vola's personal truths, the ones that she kept hidden. He snapped down the lid, not wanting to invade her privacy, but it was too late. He read the top one. I would have been a good teacher. It wasn't a terrible truth, and it didn't even seem all that personal. Still, he wished he hadn't seen it, and he pushed the tin back into the niche and slid the book in after it just as Vola came in. He pointed to the marionettes. I've got it now. Let's do the scene. But Vola only walked to the workbench and poured oil onto the whetstone. Not yet. We need a stage first. I'll put something together when I got the free time. A stage? You didn't say anything about a stage. The marionettes don't just swing in thin air over a couple of hay bales. She turned around and raised a palm to cut off Peter's protest. Listen, boy, I will see that soldier's story the way it should have been. You have to respect how much it means to me, even if you don't understand it. Which you should, by the way. You carrying that charm around, it's the same thing. You're telling that story of your mother's for her. But it'll take so long, and there's no hurry. You're gonna be here another week anyway. She clumped back to the workbench, sat down hard, and began selecting tools. Discussion over. Peter flung himself into the stack of hay bales. Another week of this, and he would go crazy. The words struck him. He didn't think of Vola as crazy anymore. He propped himself up on his elbows and studied her as she polished her tools, noticing how carefully she lifted and cleaned each one, how when she finished she laid it precisely in its place. There was a calm purposefulness to her movements that he liked, a predictability. Francois waddled in and yawned. He climbed to a crotch in the rafters above the workbench and started washing himself before a nap. It occurred to Peter that, like Francois, he had grown comfortable with Vola. Peter craned his neck to see what she was making. A handle. She'd brought in a broken hoe and was giving it a new handle. A simple thing, yet it struck him as almost magic, like his crutches. Before he'd had them, he'd been helpless. Vola had nailed a couple of boards together, and now he could swing over miles of rough country, quick and sure. Magic. He pulled the crutches over and braced them under his arms, feeling the familiar comfort their sturdy strength brought. He swung over to the workbench. I want to make something. Will you show me? Vola leaned back to study him hard, and after what seemed a full moment, she said, No sense letting your brain go to rot. You know anything about working with wood? Carve away from yourself, I know that much. Well, that's a start, but it's not what I meant. Vola chose a fresh block from her wood bin and centered it on the workbench. Who is the master here? Excuse me? Who is the boss, me or the wood? Peter understood that this was a test. He looked at the wood, blank and still waiting. Then he looked at the neat arcs of gleaming tools, so eager to cut they seemed to tremble. You're the master. Vola nodded. She selected the spoon-tipped chisel and a mallet. and gave the block the same searching look she'd given him a few moments ago, as if she were trying to read some secret message below its surface. She tapped the chisel into the fresh wood. It cut with a clean snap, and curled chips flipped onto the bench. She turned to Peter. And now, who's the master now? Vola's voice told him nothing, but the wood, its missing wedge, now a question demanding a response, spoke. The wood is, he said, certain. That's right, Vola agreed. From this moment on, the wood is the master. The carver is the servant to the wood. All craftsmen are servant to the craft. Once you decide what you want to make, the project is the boss. You know what you want to make? The answer came right away. How do you carve a fox? As soon as the words left his mouth, Peter braced for the answer he figured was coming, and how he should figure it out for himself, but Vola surprised him. Michelangelo was once asked how he created one of his statues. He said, I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free. Might be a good way to think about it. Of course, if you're going to try to find the fox in the wood, you'll have to start with some wood. She motioned Peter to follow her to the wood bin. Different woods, different merits. Basswood's easy to carve, holds fine detail, and it's light. I use it for the Marionette's heads. Now this pine, white ash is good for baseball bats, Peter offered. It's really hard. Vola passed the pine block from one hand to the other in silence for a moment. Speaking of which, she turned to Peter, you really don't own a bat? You love baseball and you don't own a bat? I'm a fielder. So what? You wait for someone to hit the ball, then you go get it? That's just reacting. Don't you want to hit too? That's not how it is. Once I've got the ball, I'm in control. I'm not reacting. I'm making choices, and I hit. The team has bats. You don't know baseball. Well, maybe I don't know baseball. She tossed the wood back into the bin with a shrug. But I'm starting to know you, and I think you need yourself a bat. Peter turned to the bin. He ran his hands through the blocks of wood while the image of the blue grass shattering over white roses swept him. The image he could avoid while he stood at the plate, a team bat in his hand, only aiming at his fiercest concentration on the pitcher's moves. If he owned his own bat again, every time he picked it up, he would see the shattered blue glass over those white roses, and it would wreck him. He lifted a honey-colored piece of wood, just the size Pax had been when he found him. How about this? He asked, his breathing tight. It's rippled like fur. Vola looked as if she were biting her lip against more of the bat debate. Butternut, she said finally. Beautiful grain, soft enough. You study it for a while. We'll carve tomorrow. Late that night, as he was about to climb into his hammock, bone-weary, Peter saw the block of wood he propped on the windowsill earlier. He barely thought about Pax all day. Guilt swept over him. He was becoming foxless, something he hadn't been since he was 7 years old. It had taken a lot longer, a year and 16 days to be exact. He figured it out, for a day to go by where he didn't think of his mother. On that day he'd gone with a friend's family on a camping trip. They'd gone into canoes in the morning and fished and swam in pitch tents and grilled hot dogs. Only when he climbed in his sleeping bag under the stars had his disloyalty struck him. He worried that night that he deserved to be motherless. He pulled her picture out of his pack. Her birthday, the kite, one of the very good memories. The kite hadn't flown. He was only 6 years old. And really it wasn't anything more than a picture of a dragon taped to some popsicle sticks. Even at that age, he'd known that if his father had been there, somehow the kite's failure would have ruined the afternoon. But he wasn't there, and his mother had just laughed about it, and they spread a blanket on the hill and made a picnic of peanut brittle and grape juice and made up a story after story about the paper dragon who was too wise to go flying off into the air when so many other adventures were waiting for him on the ground. And we are going to pick up the last part of the chapter in the next video.